Good morning. This is video number 20 of 31 of using a glucose meter as a fuel gauge. When this set of 31 videos is done, it will encompass the entire 30-day challenge for data-driven fasting. And all of that information on data-driven fasting can be found for free at optimizingnutrition.com. But a $37 payment fee would also get you into a group that does a challenge together, so that you would have a group of people to interact with for the 30 days, people to ask questions of, and 5 weekend Zoom lives for question and answer time to get all of your questions answered. Links for the free access and for the paid access are both in my description box of the video. The topic of today's video is for day 19. Fat and glucose behave differently in your body. And so this will be about fats versus carbs and what happens when the two of them are together. One of the benefits of doing this way of eating, or this way of managing one's eating, timing it according to glucose, is it can be done either with a low-fat diet or with a low-carb diet. Both work equally well. And I have a bunch of linked articles in the description box that talk about research that's been done, which is more effective, a low-carb diet or a low-fat diet. So those are accessible to you in the description box. Probably the most important thing to understand is that blood glucose behaves differently depending on the type of food you are eating. So while we could focus on fats or carbs, the really important thing to focus on is the quality of the food, because processed food has a detrimental effect to our glucose behavior. It makes our glucose go higher and stay higher longer. I'll put up an image that Marty Kendall provided for today's lesson about fats versus carbs for day 19, and it says, beware the trifecta. So these, the high carb, high fat, it becomes high energy density, and our body doesn't process that well, because of the, not just because it's a combination of fat and carbs, but because it's ultra processed food typically that is a combination of fats and carbs. I have another slide that Marty provided that shows that in nature you don't find that combination. So if you have, well, let me get the slide up just a second here. Had to make a shift inside. So I've got Marty's slide up, and it's an example that you don't typically find a combination of fats and carbs together. So in the plant food category, no combination of fats and carbs. Well, I would disagree with that in just one point, and that would be nuts and seeds, because they are going to have carbs and fats together. I think peanuts are almost an equal ratio of carbs and fats together. But I can't think of anything with meat in the meat category that I would contradict Marty on, that there's not a combination of fats and carbs together. So nothing with meat in the meat, the animal food category. So, and then the bottom quadrant of the slide, he's got, that we're anti-team carbs and fats together. And, most people don't live life like that. You have to purposefully do that. And if you do purposefully do that, you find that it's easier for your body to drop some weight and maintain weight, because putting the two together just puts more of a burden on your body. Because it's having to deal with both fuels at the same time. And so it's going to burn through the easiest fuel because of oxidative priority. I covered that in another video, and I can put a link to an article about oxidative priority. The idea that our body will burn through certain fuels in a priority, and fat is going to be the very last fuel that it burns through. That's the fuel it will store for a later date when you would need it. Say if you went for days on end without food, or you went through a famine, you're going to need that stored fat. I am going to link 2 videos from a fellow named Bill Cole, and they're both short videos, 6 or 7 minutes each. And he talks about using carbohydrates to improve thyroid function and to fix. He has a phrase that that's stuck in my head: fix the cell to get well. And I didn't exactly practice what he's talking about, but another resource I'll link in here is a link to a talk from the Mastering Diabetes guys that I did play around with for a while. They practice high carb, low fat, low protein living. And I did practice that for a while. I was playing around with it, and I was using intermittent fasting as well, but I think that it helped me as I was working to improve my thyroid function. When I realized that I was able to start titering down my thyroid medication, I was looking around for more information, and some of this was, I think, helped me in my process of improving my thyroid function. So 2 videos by Bill Cole, 1 podcast link from the Mastering Diabetes guys when they interviewed with Melanie Avalon. They answered Melanie's question: what if somebody wanted to eat both carbs and fats, but they wanted to practice separating them? Which meal would be best to have first, the carbohydrate fueled meal or the fat fueled meal? And the answer from Cyrus, I believe, was to eat the carbohydrate meal first. So say you're having 2 meals a day, which is probably ideal, better than my practice of 1 meal a day. Have the carbohydrate meal first, because carbs burn off fastest in the body, and then your glucose is most likely to return back down to your personal hunger trigger. And then later in the day, have a fat fueled meal, and fat takes longer to burn off. There's more hours for the body to use up fat than to use up carbs. And so their premise is, if you have the fat fueled meal first, you're still going to be burning it off, and your glucose isn't going to return back down to trigger as fast as it would, or as quickly as it would, if you'd had the glucose, the carb fueled meal first. So that's going to be part of today's video. Those 3 resources: the 2 videos from Dr. Cole, where he specifically mentions improving your thyroid function, and then the podcast from Cyrus Kambata and Robbie Barbaro, the Mastering Diabetes guys. I played around with the Mastering Diabetes guys method of really high carb living, and I did keep my proteins lower, and certainly the fat's lower, because I think in terms of separating fuels after doing TrimHealthyMama since 2013, that's easy for me now to separate fuels. It is a learned thing, so if you've not done that before, it may come as a challenge to you, but you can learn new things. And the downfall that I saw was I felt like I had the lowest weight ever as an adult. I also felt like I was losing lean muscle mass. I looked at my body and I felt I was sort of skinny fat, squishy. And I was continuing to listen to Marty's teaching about the importance of protein, and then I was listening to other teachers about the importance of protein. That'll be another link in this description box, the importance of protein. I have a shortish video, maybe 14 minutes, from Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and she's talking about protein, and she gives some references, some science research on the topic. So I encourage you to listen to her video. You don't have to watch it there's nothing visual that you would miss out on if you just listen to it like a podcast. I encourage you to play that and listen to it while you're doing chores around the house or something. 14 minutes well spent. And Marty's going to be teaching all that stuff too, about the importance of protein. That if we don't get enough protein in our diet, we will continue to go look for food to meet our protein needs. And as we look for food to meet our protein needs, typically that's going to come with more fuels of fats and carbs, and we're going to be raising our calorie limit. Now, we don't need to count calories. That's not the point here. But if we don't focus on getting enough protein, we will continue to take in more food in our bodies. It's unconscious to us, in our body's attempt to meet our protein needs. And the older you are, the more important it's going to be that you focus on your protein percentages, raising that up to get a higher percentage of protein in your diet. Very important. And Gabriella Lyon talks about that in her talk about the older you are, the more important the protein needs will be for you. Another resource I'm going to have in the description box is a science study about metabolic inflexibility, when mitochondrial indecision leads to metabolic gridlock. When we practice some intermittent fasting in our life, we actually help our body develop metabolic flexibility. I have this note written down for myself. During fasting, the need for insulin is reduced and the body can turn to fat stores for fuel. That's what we see in that visual of Marty's fuel tanks. And we start with glucose and we work our way on down. As glucose falls, we get into the next fuel tank. As that falls, we get into the next. And finally, we get to our body, burning our body fat. So when insulin is reduced and the body can turn to fat stores for fuel, this use of fat stores is developing metabolic flexibility. And during that time, when our body is having to be metabolically flexible, digging into our stored fuel, our body is also going into repair mode, autophagy or autophagy. Some people want to say it that way, where old cells are consumed, recycled, and used to create new cells. This repair mode does not happen when new fuel is used to create new cells. This providing regular meals, even small ones, keeps insulin consistently in process, managing blood sugar levels. So it is helpful for cleanup of our body cells when we can fast a little bit. I call it the resting and digesting phase. That when we can, close the kitchen in the afternoon, evening, go all through the night, and then delay our eating a little bit into, the morning or late morning, We give our body a chance to rest, digest, and clean up. I am going to include Marty's article about metabolic flexibility, how to give your body what it needs when it needs it. So there will be a link for that article in the description box. This particular video is going to have so many resources in it for you to learn from. And I hope something in there will be helpful for you. But the point is that we don't have to confine ourselves to just focusing on protein and low carb foods, or just focus on lean protein without fats in it and low fat foods. So we can go back and forth, eating low fat when we feel like it or low carb when we feel like it. I find it much easier to eat low carb when I'm out and about in the public, but I sure do love to have lots of fruits and vegetables. And so I had a lot of fun playing around with mastering diabetes, and I was eating a really high carb diet during that time. And then when I would kind of get feeling the need for fats, I just had this sense about me that I needed something that had fats in it. So I would go ahead and I would have a couple days of low carb eating and just return to my TrimHealthyMama meals that focused on low carb eating. Though the TrimHealthyMama low carb meals are the S meals. TrimHealthyMama has a whole alphabet. S for low carb, E for low fat, XO for crossover, where you're having both carbs and fats together. Fuel pull, where you're eating low carb and low fat, and you're just focusing on protein, lean protein, and non-starchy veggies. And that would be Marty's, what he would call focusing on protein and nutrients. So I love that I don't have to deny myself any food at all. I can even eat processed junk food when I want, but I see my glucose numbers, what that does to my glucose numbers, and I can have really nice glucose numbers, wake in the morning with, get down into the 70s, and then all of a sudden all that work has been undone and I'm back into the 80s, even high 80s, maybe even in the low 90s. It takes a few days to turn things around after eating junk food, processed factory made foods. I'll put that graphic up again about eating foods, something about eating plants, whatever. The graphic's going to be up there so you can see how that line goes. And it's talking about focusing on real food. We do the best when we eat real food, not factory made food. One last shift in location, but I'm wrapping up this video now. The point is, it doesn't matter whether you eat a low carb diet or a low fat diet. They will both work as long as you try to stick on one end or the other of the spectrum when you're choosing your meals. And you can switch back and forth. I am putting up an image for a linked article that you can read, that a study was done testing which diet gave the best weight loss, whether it was low fat or low carb. So we don't need to be in diet wars. And just like Marty said, our diet doesn't need a name, a philosophy. It just needs enough nutrients. So eat the way you want to eat and get enough nutrients. Pay attention to your glucose. Learn your glucose behavior. And try to wait long enough to let your glucose fall to your personal hunger trigger more times than not. And you will see an improvement in your weight and in your wellness. So, thank you for watching my video.